Today we will be telling two true stories from Reddit last night by Gomender and the serial killer in my town. In my city, a few months ago, a rumor started to spread about a serial killer who used a screwdriver to painfully stab his victims to death. Apparently, this murderer is still on the loose. But I kid you not, I think I'm 100% sure who this killer is, and he lives right by me. Johann Tiller is who I'm talking about. He is my neighbor, an old man who's probably in his 60s by now, but you'd be astonished at how strong he still is. He works as a repairman. Guess what repairmen use? Screwdrivers. Not just that, he has an unexplainably evil face. He looks rugged and like he's seen every atrocity on Earth. He doesn't have a wife or kids. He's always silent. You'll always see him working on some hard labor without fail. No one in the neighborhood talks to him. We all avoid him. I'm pretty sure he has a criminal record as well. You get what I'm trying to say. This guy's presence doesn't sit right with me. But how am I going to tell the police? I decided that tomorrow I'll muster up my courage and do it. But now I must sleep. So I went to bed, comfortably snuggled up in it, and rolled around in all its coziness. Then my comfort was instantly struck down as I looked out the window. Can you guess who it was? Mr. Tiller, sitting on a bench and facing my house. I let out an audible yelp as his eyes locked with mine from all the way where he's sitting. The yellow streetlight made him look even more nauseatingly malicious. I thought he was about to stand up and run at my house at full speed any moment now, but he just kept staring. Then from the corner of my eye, I saw a man walking on that same sidewalk. I watched as I knew something was about to happen to that man. Then he pulled out a screwdriver from his pocket, blew 5 holes in Mr. Tiller's chest without hesitation, and proceeded to drag him towards the park. Mr. Tiller's blood flew in fountains as he was being dragged into the darkness. I wish I was not an idiot. Young ones round here grow up dying to leave. Hard to blame them, I suppose. Not a whole lot to do round here. Some make it out. Fair play to them. Most don't, though. No, most get stuck here hating the ones that do. Been here going on 40 years now and I never known any to come back. Not one. Not until that last Tierney. Poor thing packed up her whole life to the big smoke one year and was back home to her mother and sister the year after. Quit her job, left her gaff, over a fella her mother says. Aye, a fella's part of the story all right, but he isn't the truth of it. These two were always at each other, so they were. Though her fella probably deserved it. Dylan, I think his name was. Bit of a chancer. Fancied himself a ladies' man, I heard. Gobshite. Good enough reason to always be at someone, I think. But we can't help who we love, can we? And love him she did. Loved him with all her heart that when the day came she found out she was pregnant. Tierney was over the moon, but for a second. And a second later it dawned on her that her Dylan was perhaps not the kind of man to cop on and settle down with a family. And that maybe she should keep this kind of life-changing news to herself. Or maybe, just maybe, this would be the kind of life-changing news that copped Dylan on after all. She must have thought on this for hours. Not an easy decision, mind. I don't know that I could wrestle with that. But Tierney was strong. Stronger than what people round here give her credit for. So strong, in fact, that she didn't do much in the way of crying. More so reflecting. So it was odd when the very distinct sound of someone sobbing startled Tierney. From her own sitting room, no less. Curious as she was wont to be, she crept out into the hall and slinked towards the sound. Peered round the doorframe into the sitting room, only to find no one there. And yet the sobbing grew louder. Louder and louder still as she moved towards the front door. So loud it was that she had to cup her ears for fear of going deaf. And when she couldn't even hear herself think, she sunk to the floor and screamed at the top of her lungs as it was the only thing she could muster up a thought to do. But the desperate cry that escaped her throat had no sound at all. She cried then. You ever hear tell of a banshee? Terrible omens they are. Heralds of death. Awful whores. Me mother used to put the fear of God in us with stories of 'em. Stories that would make the hairs on the back of your neck stand straight up to the heavens. Or maybe they weren't stories. Who can say otherwise? Perspective. What matters is what you see or hear or feel, and most of all, what you believe. And sure enough, that night young Tierney believed right down to her very soul that she had heard the keening of a banshee. And that terrified the shite out of her. Hard to say how much time passed, for Tierney realized her own cries were all she could hear. She thought herself silly, imagining things so she was, rationalizing as we all do when faced with the unknown. She laughed at the ridiculousness of it all, At the dread she felt, and at the blubberin' mess she was, and at the fool who knocked her up, and at the shadow that spilled from the sill of the front door. Her heart stuck in her throat. How long had it been there? She willed herself up, turned the latch, swung the door open, and there Dylan stood. He asked if she was okay. She nodded and wiped her eyes. He kissed her on the cheek before brushing past. A cloud of drink and cigarettes and perfume followed him. A lot were said between those two that night. A lot that need not bear repeating. Ain't none of it can be taken back now, I suppose. You see, that was the last night Tierney saw Dylan. Their argument went on for what felt like hours, and all the while, Tierney was very aware of the keening that echoed all round her. She couldn't think, couldn't argue back, couldn't even bring herself to tell Dylan about what she was hearing. Could he hear it? Didn't seem so. Why not? She needed a break, needed to gather herself, and so she said as much. All this to say that Dylan was pissed. So pissed he was that with a final fuck ye to Tierney, he stormed out. Not wanting him to have the last word, she followed him. He was almost at the end of the hall when she ripped the front door open. She wanted to shout after him and curse at him and what have ye, but the words wouldn't come. She was frozen to the spot, doe-eyed and slack-jawed. She let him go. The lass returned to her mother not long after, and her babby came not long after that. I bumped into her and her young lad a while ago. Asked her how come she came back. Asked her where the young lad's father was. Wish I kept my nose out of it now. She sat me down. Didn't say nothing for some time. I could see her mustering up the courage. She said I wouldn't believe her and that there weren't any use in telling me. Tell me anyways, I said. She took me back to the last night she saw Dylan. To the moment she stood frozen in the doorway. Said she wanted to shout after him, but the words wouldn't come. Said the air grew cold and a chill ran down her spine and all the hairs on the back of her neck stood straight up to the heavens. Said Dylan wasn't alone. That a spindly shape of cloth and bone flowed after him with wisps of fiery red hair swirling all round, as if it were drowning, and ashen hands reaching for the poor lad's neck. And the crying. God, the crying, she said. Felt like it was inside her head and all round her and wrong. Never heard the likes of it. Unnatural, so it was. And then Dylan was gone. Turned the corner with the shade at his heels. The quiet was instant. Tierney tiptoed down the hall, as curious as she ever was. Even for turning the corner, she knew in her heart that her Dylan wouldn't be there. Sometimes I see her and her young lad about the town. Getting big now, so he is. Wonder if he knows. Wonder if the truth will become just another tale to scare him. I often think on this when passing them by and about the stories me mother used to tell us. Was there any truth to them? How can I say otherwise knowing what I know? What I think on most, however, is if she told him. Dylan, I mean. Did he know he was going to be a father for he was ripped from this world? I hope so.